Hi there. Welcome to episode 11 of Afrikanists Assemble. In keeping with our habit of creative questioning, we tried to provoke our contributors to think objectively about their disciplines, to make them alien, in fact. The question we asked was, let's pretend that you're an extraterrestrial flying down to Earth and visiting your academic setting and field of study for the first time. What do you find strange about it? Let's hear what they came up with.
Was würde eine Außerirdische wohl sonderbar finden in den Afrika-Studien? Ich nehme den Blickwinkel durch meine Arbeit im Fachinformationsdienst Afrika-Studien, der African Studies Library, und durch meine Arbeit in Bibliotheken und mit Wissenschaftskommunikation. Dabei möchte ich das Thema vom Journal Impact Factor kurz beleuchten. Der Journal Impact Factor ist ja der wichtigste bibliometrische Indikator für das Prestige und Einfluss eines wissenschaftlichen Journals. Auch in den Afrika-Studien, denn wichtige Zeitschriften wie African Affairs, Journal of African Cultural Studies, Journal of Modern African Studies von verschiedenen Verlagen wie zum Beispiel Oxford University Press, Cambridge University Press oder Taylor & Francis geben immer bei ihren Journal-Webseiten den Impact-Faktor an. So wird es dazu genommen, um die Qualität von Publikationen und auch von der Forschung zu messen, wird oft dafür eingesetzt, um auch Forscherinnen zu bewerten, gerade bei der Einstellung oder Beförderung. Aber es ist eigentlich für die Afrika-Studien total ungeeignet, da der Journal Impact Factor durch Clarivate Analytics rausgegeben wird, die als Datengrundlage das Web of Science benutzen. Und das Web of Science schließt ja einen großen Teil von wissenschaftlichen Journals aus. Zum Beispiel finden Fachjournals aus Afrika, Lateinamerika und Südostasien kaum Eingang in die Zitationsdatenbank von der Web of Science. Ein weiterer Nachteil, auch besonders für die Afrika-Studien, ist die Ausgrenzung von Forschung in anderen Sprachen als Englisch, sodass die ganze afrikawissenschaftliche Forschung auf Französisch und Portugiesisch, aber auch Arabisch überhaupt keinen Eingang findet. Und deswegen wundert es mich immer wieder, wie viel Anerkennung dem Journal Impact Factor gegeben wird, da es ja erstens gar nicht für die Messung von Forschungsqualität gedacht war. Es war ja eigentlich entworfen worden, um Bibliotheken beim Kauf von Journals zu unterstützen, aber auch, dass es die Afrika-Studien spezifisch nochmal benachteiligt. Ja, das würde mich sehr wundern, wenn ich eine Außerirdische wäre und hier auf einmal auftauchen würde.
As an outsider for the first time into this world and into the discipline of literary studies, there are a range of things I will certainly find strange. It will be intriguing for me, for example, how everything in literary studies is built on difference, on classification, on categorizations that are often shaky and unreliable. I find it strange that literary studies is built on the idea that there is something distinctly literature. However, at the very beginning, the researcher in this field is confronted with varied ideas pieced together and branded as literature. To be literary, it implies it has to be made of letters, for example. This already informs some kind of exclusionism, because the vast exceptional expressions that are still in oral form are already excluded in this category. Even though the literary works are often seen as the best that has been thought and said in a given culture, there are a number of cultures in which the best that has been thought and said is still preserved in the oral form. But what I have just said is an example of the strangeness of the literary studies. If the manifest aspect of certain disciplines are to be taken out of the literary studies, it will be left as an uninteresting and vacuous field. It is strange that we in literary studies often take it for granted that we are doing the work of a linguist, only that we are more interested in how something is said in the most formal and creative way. We are doing the work of a historian as we dive through the artistic portrayal of the past, though unlike the historian, we doubt the authenticity of past accounts, and we are not interested in their truthfulness. We are doing the work of a philosopher and a religious scholar, looking at how literature offers us a projection of life that is significant, that is timeless, and that is refined, despite the fact that we don't engage in dogmatic prescription of what and how life ought to be. It is strange that even though we are very much interested in the study of social relationships in the society among humans and with other inhabitants of the planet, we don't call ourselves sociologists or any label in the natural sciences. I always ask myself, what would our object of study become when all these are taken away?
Besides all the general odd and strange things universities and academia hold, it might be true that African studies can be called strange in itself. This applies to the study of African history as well, the field I am working in. I rarely think about it nowadays, but a phrase like, "I'm doing African history in Germany," is actually quite strange, and a number of facts support this feeling. The majority of books about the past of African regions, cultures, and languages are being published outside of the continent. European countries spend millions on research about Africa, and Europeans sit in well-designed and well-equipped research facilities while debating about African lives. I think over time I got used to these fundamental discrepancies and started to overlook lasting inequalities and problems. As a historian, I am especially puzzled by how much I myself and others still investigate African histories through the colonial archive. By that I mean focusing on European agency in Africa, may it be good or bad. The rise of research on colonial histories in the recent years has been fruitful in many ways, but it also has deepened a one-sided understanding of the past. As the period of decolonization gains more momentum in research at the moment, there's a bit of a shift towards African agency. One can hope it should continue to push that this carries through and will show the diversity, complexity, and richness of African histories beyond the 1960s. This field of Afrikanistik or African studies therefore holds a big question mark for me. Formed as a tool to make colonial rule more effective and to establish political alliance and dependence during the Cold War, I am unsure of what it is today. It is still a helper for developmental cooperation, a forum for foreign and international policies, and a tool in building and sustaining economic and cultural relations between Africa and the world. All these things have their good and bad potential, but I think Afrikanistik might hold its biggest potential in something else, in challenging the very nature of its existence. In the beginning it appeared odd to me, as so many PhD students and professors questioned the subject at its core. But this might be a productive way of engaging with the troublesome history of one's discipline and a way of recalibrating it. The uneasiness of that situation hopefully produces a better understanding of epistemic violence and real-life barriers for researchers from African countries. Barriers like the team around the Cameroonian historian Albert Guafo had to experience just at the beginning of this year. They were denied visas to enter Germany. Therefore, they could not continue their studies on cultural artifacts that were taken from Cameroon during the German colonial rule. Maybe this is something which just adds to a whole list of similar inequalities and challenges, and sadly does not appear strange to us anymore, but it should.
O que me tira sono no meu trabalho acadêmico é uma sensação estranha em relação à produção de conhecimento. Eu acordo sobressaltado a pensar que o que julgo ter aprendido ao longo do dia continua a ser aquilo que é possível saber. Num primeiro momento, vai ser difícil ver onde está o problema de saber aquilo que é possível saber. Bom, o problema está no fato de o conhecimento que se obtém desta maneira não ser outra coisa senão o efeito dos meus modos de saber. Dito de outro modo, aquilo que sei pode não ser necessariamente aquilo que o mundo ou a realidade são, mas sim aquilo que os meus instrumentos me permitem saber. É como um pão, por exemplo. As formas que ele pode assumir são várias, mas na prática elas estão limitadas às formas que eu uso para meter a massa no forno. E sempre que eu recorrer às formas que tenho para confeccionar o pão, eu vou obter apenas aquelas formas pré-disponibilizadas pelos meus utensílios de cozinha, mesmo que eu esteja a experimentar uma nova receita. Então, se eu fosse um extraterrestre e aterrasse na Terra para fazer uma visita ao meu mundo acadêmico, o que eu espero que fosse estranho seria a pouca importância que eu e os meus colegas atribuímos a este problema. Eu gostaria de ter sentidos que me permitissem ver as perguntas que nós estamos a fazer e, por causa disso, as respostas que nós estamos a ter. Eu vejo este problema, por exemplo, na sociologia política ou na sociologia do desenvolvimento. Nós reagimos aos recentes golpes de Estado em África com perguntas que nos devolvem um mundo familiar e preocupamos-nos pouco em partir do princípio de que um insólito em África não é o golpe de Estado, mas sim o fato de ele não acontecer em mais países e com maior frequência ainda. É o mesmo com a sociologia do desenvolvimento. Nós achamos estranho que o continente não se desenvolva, quando o que me parece interessante é entender por que países com uma história como a africana deviam se desenvolver. Como extraterrestre, eu gostaria imenso de colocar na agenda intelectual da minha área de estudo a procura das perguntas que nós não fazemos. Gostaria de, através disso, ter uma ideia daquilo que não é possível saber e refletir sobre o que isso nos diz sobre a qualidade do que julgamos saber. Para eu voltar a dormir em paz, gostaria imenso de ter a certeza de que o nosso conhecimento não nos devolve o mundo ou a realidade como realmente são, mas sim é apenas uma versão limitada que é, por sua vez, artefato dos nossos modos de saber. Só isso.
There will be a lot of things strange in it. This is what we call the man from Mars view. And the man from Mars does not know how anything works, does not understand what a refrigerator is. You would have to explain it, that it's a box that cools things. It's the same thing that I think when students are in a classroom, to explain to the man from Mars that these students have left their various homes and they've left their various rooms and they're now put into one room with maybe 2 doors and 3 windows or something, and they're all focusing on the teacher. When really education should be, outdoors. I'm sure the man from Mars will be wondering what kind of education or what kind of learning would take place in a place where they're all seated in little seats and trying to focus and pay attention. It's the furniture for learning and instruction that I think, as somebody who's never been on Earth, will find very strange. It will be what I have termed eco-epistemology, where nature itself is a source of knowing and where learners can actually interact with nature in their attempt to learn. They can learn anything by just simply being in nature and at any level. It all depends on how it is structured and the episodes of learning too. So I see the present system of education as very, very strange. There are so many things that students could do with what they're learning immediately, not just learn it and then apply it. That is the beauty of eco-epistemology, which I will try in all my ways to explain to this person who has never been on Earth. I wonder what the learning in Mars will be like. I doubt very much it will be the kind of thing we do here, or what Paulo Freire calls the banking method, where we hope to pass on knowledge from one all-knowing master to learning peoples. It will be staying in the field, staying in nature to relate to it, to make sure that things that are not in place are properly in place, will be my idea of learning.
Hi, I'm a being from the outer space, visiting and observing for the first time activities in social linguistics in an academic setting in some place in Nigeria. I understand some things about academics and also social linguistic studies, so I can credibly state that in this setting, I consider the regulations for reporting findings from studies and the parameters for assessing research reports in this discipline strange. In the academic setting I visited, scholars were actively engaged in the study of linguistic practices of different people in different contexts, investigations into the linguistic repertoires of diverse groups, and the examination of language use in different domains, among others. The scholars are expected to report findings in standard variety of English, and to employ popular framework of analysis by renowned scholars. The preferred analytical tools to produce empirical knowledge that would be acceptable are often theories proposed by scholars of Western origin. Ability to report findings in standard variety of English increases the chances of acceptability of the work. It attracts a high score, which is a key requirement for promotion or graduation of scholars from the program. To this end, scholars make desperate attempts to package findings from their studies to fit into popular models and other prescribed guidelines. The challenges I observed in this practice include the following. The high grades given to reports in standard variety of English invariably means that reports written in non-standard English earns low grade. This parameter of assessment demoralizes brilliant scholars who may not have gained high proficiency in written English. In the same vein, papers written in low prestige variety of English are often rejected. The implication of the rejection is that useful information from such works may not be harvested and disseminated. Another challenge is that scholars who have been able to accurately observe a peculiar sociolinguistic phenomenon adequately explain it, but may not be able to find a popular analytical model will be frustrated, as the key findings from the study may be dismissed as lacking empirical basis. In the end, the report will be regarded as a mere story, lacking required scholarly and empirical standing, which will make the paper publishable or acceptable in the faculty for promotion or the award of a university degree. The sad outcome of the requirement is that original knowledge about a language, as well as the linguistic practices of specific people, which would have contributed not just to the knowledge database and the discipline, but would have served as a model for further studies, are lost. Another negative outcome I see is the attempt by scholars in this academic terrain to recycle already researched topics with slight modification of context, as well as high rate of plagiarism of parts of works accepted as empirical in the discipline. As an extraterrestrial being, I look at humans in the field of humanities struggling to model report of their studies after reports of laboratory experiments in pure and applied sciences. I feel sad. As I look at humans struggling to explain their findings from an original study with models developed by scholars who do not have the slightest idea about the peculiarities of the context of their studies, I feel sad. As I look at humans trying to communicate findings from their studies in a language they are yet to gain adequate proficiency in, which results in their inability to capture the exact nuances of the actions, practices, ideologies, and knowledge from their authentic studies, I feel very sorry for them. I wish I have a voice to speak and direct them on the right path. As I look at the sad faces of brilliant scholars whose papers have been rejected and labeled mere fables, which cannot be accepted as distinguished academic writings, I wish the faculty can hear me. I would have told them how poorly they have rated an original work. When I look at publishers who have consistently rejected original works of brilliant scholars, I desperately wish that I could speak in clear human voice. I would have told them, hey, you just missed some fresh information that could perhaps birth new knowledge that would reinvigorate your discipline.
Flying down to earth, visiting the discipline of translation studies for the first time, I would quickly acknowledge one thing that is strange, whereby in this context I interpret the word strange from the perspective of something remarkable. One can argue that as a field of study, translation is largely hinged on language and meaning. Looking at language as a unique aspect of human interaction, it is amazing how human beings are able to create, recreate, deconstruct social aspects, feelings, emotions, as well as viewpoints. Language manifests itself as an integral part to the life of human beings. It is an embodiment of culture, and within it, cultural aspects and realities are negotiated and manifest. In a special way,
One can argue that language is a vehicle that carries the spirit of a speech community, while at the same time availing an opportunity to understand the group as well as the individual aspirations in life. The most fundamental aspect of language, especially while in use, is the manner in which the users ascribe specific and unique meanings to the words they use. When engaging in translation, the remarkable thing is how a third party to a specific instance of language use manages to immerse themselves, deduce the meaning, while at the same time recreating it and reconfiguring the uniqueness of the language they encounter so as to relay the spirit therein to a different speech community. On the one hand, the ability of words from a given language to have profound impact, both positive and negative, in the world of a specific group of users, and on the other hand, the process of transference that is central to translation studies, to me, is just amazing.
Flying down to Earth, coming across my field of studies for the first time, which is part of the social sciences, what I find strange about this field of studies is the flexibility involved in it. When other field of studies like natural sciences are so fixed and so dependent on sample sizes, the flexibility in social sciences is so wide, considering how much sample size can hardly ever be so precise. Yes, it is involved with societies, and we know the diversities that are actually involved in societies, which now make it a little bit possible for sample sizes to be precise, and which now indirectly gives this level of flexibility. So I find it a little bit strange, like, oh, so there could be a field of studies that could be this flexible as the social sciences. And I also find it strange somehow that it might be difficult for researchers of this field of studies, especially those who are conducting research in societies where they are connected to, or in topics that they are highly related to, how difficult it can be not to be so attached to this research, how difficult it can be not to sometimes even see yourself in the shoe of your respondents. The closeness in this field of study is really strange, kind of like it's difficult to detach yourself from it, except for researchers who choose to go to a very strange community where they know nothing about completely and they really want to start from scratch to get information. Yeah, they could get this without any attachment to their research, just to get information out of it. But the strangeness about social sciences is that, to an extent, whether you're connected to the community or not, getting responses from your respondents kind of make you attached somehow. So yes, the flexibility in this field of studies, the imprecise nature of data of sample size, and then the closeness that researchers get with your respondents when they are carrying out research.
Kwa mfano sasa ndio nimewasili duniani kwa mara ya kwanza kutoka nje ya sayari ya dunia na kuyakabili mawanda ya taaluma yangu na mazingira yake. Nilistaajabia mengi. Nilishangaa kwa namna ambavyo taaluma ya fasihi kwa lugha za Kiafrika ilivyoandaliwa na kuwasilishwa. Nilishtushwa na jinsi taaluma hiyo ilivyo na mawanda mapana yenye matawi mengi. Nilikumbana na taaluma ya fasihi yenye mikabala mbalimbali inayozingatia lugha na tamaduni tofauti tofauti za Kiafrika na mwingiliano wake na tamaduni za Ulaya. Vile vile nilipata kufahamu kwamba taaluma hii inachunguzwa na kuchanganuliwa kiumakinifu kwa kuzingatia mahitaji yake na mahitaji ya watu katika jamii, ujenzi na mwelekeo wa kifalsafa na itikadi za Kiafrika, pamoja na mwingiliano wa fasihi hizi na taaluma nyinginezo. Ilinibainikia ya kwamba taaluma ya fasihi kwa lugha za Kiafrika inazalisha maarifa muhimu sana. Maarifa haya yanaainishwa, kuwasilishwa na kuhifadhiwa kwenye maabara za maarifa ya lugha na fasihi. Vile vile niligundua ya kuwa maabara hizi ni chemichemi muhimu ya maarifa na data ya taaluma hizi. Ilikuwa ni ibra kubwa kuona machapisho mengi yakiwa yamewasilishwa na kuhifadhiwa kwa mfumo wa teknolojia ya kidijitali. Mfumo wa masomo na ujifunzaji uliendeshwa kwa mfumo wa teknolojia na vifaa vya kielektroniki na njia ya mtandaoni au hewani. Mara nyingi wanafunzi walikutana mtandaoni. Mazingira ya kitaaluma pia yalitawaliwa na vifaa vya teknolojia za mawasiliano. Wanafunzi kutoka maeneo mbalimbali duniani walikutana hewani au mtandaoni kwa ajili ya mafunzo. Kwa hiyo si lazima kukutana ana kwa ana. Na cha kushangaza zaidi ni kwamba data au taarifa nyingi kutoka pembe zote za dunia inaelekea zinaweza kupatikana kwa urahisi kwa njia ya teknolojia bila ya kulazimika kutafuta data hizo nyanjani.
I consider it strange that despite the growing presence of technology in the world, students in this academic setting seem not to have fully utilized the available technology to their academic advantage. Well, thanks to technology and the internet facilities that have made life and tasks easier for lecturers and students alike. But this is my personal observation. The generation of students we have on our campuses today are largely active on social media more than anything else. A number of them are obsessed with their smartphones, tablets, and computers, chatting all day on WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and other social media handles, with little or no time to think, read, or engage themselves productively in their academic pursuit. Only few of them utilize such avenues and tools to source substantial and helpful materials towards self-development and academic excellence. These I find strange. I consider it strange that a number of research studies carried out by academic staff in Nigeria are self-funded by their inadequate salary received at month end. With such monthly payments, most academics are unable to meet all their needs, let alone use part of it to fund their research. By implication, most researchers don't have the means to carry out research studies or to promote their works as well as their findings. This also I consider strange in our academic setting. I consider it strange that in our academic setting, academic calendar is disrupted by frequent strike actions by the country's lecturers. Over time, such annual disruptions have been occasioned by government's partial or non-implementation of agreements it signed with the Academic Staff Union of Universities, also called ASU. In the history of the union, the longest strike action was recorded in the year 2020 when ASU went on a 9-month strike to drive home a range of demands bordering on poor funding and welfare of its members, among other needs. Currently, ASU is on 1-month warning strike, basically over issues of funding and allowances. Until the Nigerian government shows her commitment towards sustaining and improving her educational sector, incessant strikes are still imminent. For me, this is strange. So, if as an extraterrestrial flying down the earth and visiting this academic setting, these are some of the things I consider strange.
Was finde ich an meinem eigenen alltäglichen Arbeitsumfeld erstaunlich oder sonderbar? Also eigentlich nichts, denn ich bin da sehr gerne am Institut für Afrikanistik und Ägyptologie an der Universität zu Köln. Ich finde meine Kolleginnen und Kollegen sehr liebenswürdig und sehr klug und auch sehr interessant und ich glaube, ich lerne von ihnen allen jeden Tag irgendetwas Neues. Und deswegen ist es mir da eigentlich auch noch nie langweilig gewesen. Ich finde meine Kolleginnen und Kollegen auch sehr originell, auch in der Art, wie sie so ihre verschiedenen Forschungen oder was sie sonst so tun, gestalten und wie sie das auch anderen dann vermitteln. Das ist doch alles ganz wunderbar und ich glaube, das, was man mag, findet man in der Regel nicht sonderbar und auch nicht verwunderlich, sondern einfach so ganz gut. Ja, und so ist es auch bei mir. Als Außerirdische würde ich mich also über gar nichts wundern, wenn ich mich das erste Mal an dem Ort, wo ich mein alltägliches Arbeitsumfeld so finde, aufhielte. Ich würde mich wahrscheinlich erst zu wundern beginnen, wenn ich mich außerhalb dieses Ortes so ein bisschen umsehen würde. Und dann würde ich vielleicht anfangen, mich sehr zu wundern. Also zum Beispiel über die Beharrlichkeit, mit der dort ausgegrenzt und abgesondert wird und man eigentlich nichts lernen will von dem, was man so lernen könnte von anderen Leuten und beharrt auf irgendwelchen komischen, puristischen Vorstellungen. Ja, das würde ich zum Beispiel als Außerirdische sehr verwunderlich finden. Die ganze viele Kraft und Energie, die ganze Zeit aufgebracht werden muss, um Leute auf irgendeine Art und Weise zu etwas zu machen, was sie sein müssen, damit man sie ertragen kann. Ja, nee, das würde mich wundern. Aber das war nicht die Frage. Und deswegen, ich würde mich als Außerirdische über nichts am Institut für Afrikanistik und Ägyptologie an der Universität zu Köln wundern, die ich aber Gott sei Dank nicht bin, weil mir auf sehr schnellen Flügen immer wahnsinnig schlecht wird.
I think the biggest thing that I would find strange in that situation is still the power structures that exist in this field. There are a lot of scholars who write and come from East Africa and write in Swahili and who control the thinking or have big says in how thinking and thought is done within East Africa. But the Western academic institutions and power structures that exist as a hegemonic system across the world are definitely much more powerful and hold much more sway, at least in my experience. And I think that that's strange when we compare it to other fields of study. For example, if we were to look at English literature studies, the centers of study that are the best for those things are based in the UK and the US. Whereas on a global scale, if you want to study Swahili studies, some of the best institutions and some of the best scholars and professors are not in East Africa. They're not in Zanzibar or Tanzania or Kenya. And that's not to say that there aren't great centers of study there. It's just that the perception of those centers of study, they're not as seen as well on a global scale. Now, obviously, within the Swahili studies community, we accept that that's a problem and that we want to change it. And that's why also part of the cluster, part of the Reconfiguring African Studies project, that's why it's so important. But yeah, I find this a very difficult question because it's hard to take myself out of my own views. And I think Swahili studies is lucky in that it still has a very strong cultural center, and it has a lot of philosophers and writers and poets who continue to work in Swahili without being so concerned about these global power structures. So perhaps that is also what's strange, is that compared to other areas of African studies, Swahili studies is particularly strong. But yeah, it's difficult, and I think those power structures is perhaps the main focus of what I would find strange.
Those are all our contributions this month. Do you think they nailed what an alien would find strange about these disciplines, or do you think their spaceships passed over something? Tell us in the comments below. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Afrikanists Assemble. If you want to catch every episode when it comes out, go ahead and subscribe to our channel. See you next month.
Cherchez-moi mon bébé.